these roles were like so scary for typical middle class parents because they thought no stability and no growth. Suddenly there's so much demand to be the best in your field rather than trying to chase something that maybe you're not. The reassuring thing is that the world is changing every 2 years. So it's kind of like foolish to plan way in advance because you don't even know whether that job will exist in 6 years, right? 2, 3, 4 years at a time, maybe 3 years when you're starting out, and maybe every 2 years once you're into your career is not a bad idea, right? You change as a person, your interests and priorities change, the ecosystem changes, things that you never thought you would be able to do, you can do now.
Hey there, welcome to Marketing Mavericks with Indiefolio. Today we have Shreya Sajdev with us, who's the Associate Director and Head of Marketing at Puma India. Shreya and I discuss her journey and a lot of opinions and advice for young marketers, as well as agency founders and creative people. Thanks a lot for your time, Shreya, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi Kavan, glad to finally be here.
Yeah, I think it's taken a long time to get here, so I'm very happy that you gave me time during holidays.
Yeah.
And super excited to speak to you. I think a lot of young marketers would love to see themselves in your shoes one day. And I think there are very few marketers I've spoken to who are young and they've done so much in such a short period of time. So let me start by asking you my first question, and that is about just generally you having been in IIM, having worked in McKinsey. They're very competitive generally as organizations, and also they are in a lot of people's vision board these days. So what's your advice to anybody who would like to kind of get into a tier 1 company or a tier 1 college like these two organizations?
Honestly, I'm always a little very giving advice because I do feel like everyone's journey is influenced by very different things. Like a lot of it is also being at the right place at the right time, having done the right things, parents who could foresee what would help you get further in life and make you do it at the right time, right? Because a lot of us are very naive and stupid as kids, right? But honestly, I think. First of all, I think the definition of tier one is kind of changing, right? I think startups have done a great job at kind of shifting the perception of what a tier one company looks like and what kind of trajectory you can have. Um, that being said, I think with IMs it's a fairly, I think, standard clear process in terms of you give the exam and you give the interview, and I think if you have those two pat, I think you're broadly okay. I think the real challenge comes once you get in and then you have to sit for placements, right? I think that's where, of course, different companies look at different things. But in general, I think some decent, I think, pointers to keep in mind. Just most companies like well-rounded CVs, so do more than just study, and I think it's great for your personality as well. You meet new people, you discover new things. Big proponent of sport, I think. I played a bunch of sport thanks to my parents at a young age, and it teaches you like everything from teamwork to like accepting failure at a young age. Learning to fight on despite, no matter how down in the dumps you are, right? So I think a well-rounded CV is one. I think the second is also, and this is a little bit biased given my journey, but I think um, people, I mean, if they're looking for a particular type of profile, they will pick the best possible candidate in that profile. So it helps to be a little different because at least you stand out and you have something different to contribute, right? So I think that always helps. There is, of course, like consulting companies typically have this way of looking at a resume where they look at your academic qualifications, they look at your positions of responsibility, they look at your extracurriculars and your work experience, and they basically grade all of them. And if you're exceptional in two probably and decent at the other two is when you have a shot. right? And everything from what grades you score to what is the pedigree of your college, where you have worked, what is the type of work that you've done, if you've done extracurriculars, have you done something with consistency and in depth and done it well. So it always helps to do, something for a long period of time and do it till you reach a certain level, like a district level or a national level, right? So I think again, the basic concept is, if you've consistently done well in your life, right, the likelihood that you will do well when you get into the ecosystem is high, right? That's the basic logic. um, that being said, honestly, placements are very unpredictable, right? People that you think had a sure shot don't make it to the short list. People who make it to the short list and you're sure they will clear the interview rounds, just fumble it on the final day. There are a lot of unexpected people who make it to the final round. So it's really very difficult to accurately predict, right? Which is why I think one really shouldn't sweat this too much, because eventually you end up where you're supposed to be. Right. So I think, yeah, it's a combination of all of this. But yeah, like, honestly, in my journey, nothing was preempted and everything was really serendipity and coincidence. So I think we tend to overthink our journeys a bit too much. And I think, yeah, it's easy for me to say, having gotten to where I would like to be at this point, but I think I also got there because I didn't stress too much, and kind of let the path kind of, yeah, show itself for me. So I think we need to be a little less stressed, especially because, unlike in our parents' generation, we have a lot more opportunities, right? I mean, it's not just two or three career paths that kind of make your life and the rest are, yeah, you struggling. Like, there are way more options. Creative people who were initially, these roles were like so scary for typical middle class parents because they thought no stability and no growth. Suddenly there's so much demand, right? So I really think the right way to look at this is your competencies and your interest, and then build on those to be the best in your field, rather than, yeah, trying to chase something that maybe you're not probably cut out for. Probably you'll get and then you'll be miserable in.
Right.
Yeah.
I think, very well put. And when it comes to, I believe, like you said, serendipity and maybe doing unconventional things, it's really, really key. I feel today so many people stress a lot on what am I doing, who am I, what do I like, do I know what my vision is, when they're barely, 18 years old. And then they get pretty stressed out because they have no clue, actually,
Yeah.
because they've not exposed themselves much.
Yeah, honestly, I
Also,
think the reassuring thing is that the world is changing every 2 years, right? So it's kind of like foolish to plan way in advance because you don't even know whether that job will exist in 6 years, right? So I think, like, taking it 4 years at a time, maybe 3 years when you're starting out, and maybe every 2 years once you're into your career, is not a bad idea, right? You change as a person, your interests and priorities change, the ecosystem changes, things that you never thought you would be able to do, you can do now. Things that you were so sure you will do, AI is now rendering useless. So I think take it 2 years, 3 years at a time, it's fine.
I think that's the best advice right now, right? That don't
Yeah,
think too much, think 2 years at a time, because nobody knows
correct.
what's going to happen after
Yeah,
2027.
true.
On the unconventional piece, I think even your background wouldn't be typically conventional, right? You learned literature, then you had some experience in strategy, and then you did marketing. In fact, I've had the pleasure to talk to a lot of head of marketings and CMOs for this podcast, and huge chunk of them barely have a marketing background. They're engineers, they're art people, or as you said, strategy and management people, and they've kind of come here. Do you feel that this is possible for a young marketer today? Because be it you or even more senior people I've spoken to from an age point of view, 10 years, 15, 20, 30 years ago, maybe the landscape was very different compared to today, which is highly competitive and everybody claims to know marketing. Do you feel that an MBA, a tier one college, a certain kind of an internship with a certain kind of company is a must, or are marketers in companies like Puma still going ahead and hiring people with an unconventional path?
Well, I don't really have the stats on this, but honestly, so many roles that we do kind of just boil down to first principle and basic skill sets. right? Logic, problem solving, ownership, agility, so much of that, right? And that is especially true in senior roles, right? Because the percentage of skill set versus mindset gets differently skewed as you go up the ladder, right?
Right.
So you don't necessarily have to be the most creative person in a team to lead the team, right? And that is frankly true for a lot of roles. So I don't think, unless of course it's a very technical role, like I can't be a photographer, right? I don't have those skills. That's a very technical role, or I can't do coding. I don't have those skills. But barring a few very technical roles where experience is super critical, according to me, I think most roles, especially leadership roles, I think what you have expertise in is less important.
Hmm.
How you kind of navigate some of those basic skill sets are probably more critical, right? So I think that's less important. um, at least in Puma, what we've realized is the formula is, you need to have an inclination, but you don't need to necessarily have experience, right? I mean, I have somebody in my team who's done 10 years of sales and then moved, and the principal was she's a high performer and high ownership and a fighter and very agile, so she will do well wherever she's put.
Hmm.
Right. And similarly, I have somebody who was an engineer, interned with us, and then just grew in the system. I have somebody who's done banking. I like, it's very varied, honestly. And it has less to do with your background. It has more to do with a certain spark or an inclination that you show. Right. Again, that is not true for all roles. If I'm looking for a photographer, I will look at what past work he's done, or if I'm looking at a graphic designer, I will look at what tools they can work with. But I think, barring those very technical skill sets, I think, and I see this true of a lot of companies, right? I mean, startups do this all the time. For me, honestly, some of our most successful hires have been internal transfers from different teams, because they know the ecosystem. You've seen their performance up close. They are a high performer wherever they are. So I mean, what we do is not rocket science. The assumption is they will be a high performer here as well, right? And of course, like I said, inclination helps. So if I'm looking for somebody doing sports marketing, you must be passionate about sports, right? Otherwise you can't do it. But that doesn't necessarily mean you have to do sports marketing before, right? You can pick it up on the job. So honestly, in general, my belief is that years of experience in a particular industry are not really very critical to most roles, barring technical ones, not just marketing. Of course, like I said, a lot of this also boils down to being in the right place at the right time. Like, you may be, like a have great potential, but if I don't have a role open for you in my system, like, so it's, I mean, like, people really shouldn't beat themselves up, because a lot of us have gotten has been right time, right opportunity, all of that. So yeah, it's a combination of so many things beyond just what you put in,
Right.
that it's really difficult to predict, what is the right way to get somewhere, to be honest.
Absolutely. I think what would be really helpful is if you can give your opinion on generally what you feel a good marketer should, who they should be. And I'll tell you why I ask you. When I speak to young marketers or even students in colleges, they're very confused about marketing today because
Hmm.
traditionally marketing was ads banayenge, celebrities
Hmm.
will, I'll work with them,
Hmm.
we look creative
Hmm.
things.
Hmm.
Now the conversation is all about data,
Hmm.
strategy, a lot about
Hmm.
numbers. So
Hmm.
people are like, is marketing a good marketer an analytical brain or a creative brain?
Hmm.
So if you can kind of
Hmm.
unpack that, will be really helpful.
Good question. We also don't know what marketing is anymore. But look, I think, again, I think you need both skill sets. And that doesn't necessarily mean that each individual has to have both skill sets, but as a whole, as a team, you should be able to bring all of it together, right? And that is on the on the manager to be able to hire diversely enough to cover all of the blind spots that you might have, right? So of course we need super creative people that can sit in a room and jam together and come up with great ideas, and then expecting them to do excel really well is just really unreasonable. But you also need people who have a strong data orientation and an ROI orientation, people who work well with both, you know, stakeholders within the organization and outside the organization, people who are well aware of what at the end of the day business priorities we are driving and how to achieve those, right? And it's unfair to expect all of that from one person, but if you hire right, I think your team should have a combination of all of these people. Right. Again, I think inclination is super important. So like what I tell people is that if you get bogged down by a constantly changing ecosystem, then marketing is not for you, right? Because the space just evolves very rapidly, because consumer behavior is just evolving very rapidly. And if you're somebody who, you know, who finds change stressful, if you're somebody who wants a clear cut, very structured answer on what their role and job description will be, this is probably not the right role for you. It will be more stressful than exciting. But if you really thrive in the chaos, I think marketing's great. Because none of us know what we're doing, frankly. We're figuring it out on a day-to-day basis, right? So I think you should be excited by new ideas, you should be excited by a constantly changing landscape, and there should be a certain inclination, right? So when I also hire people for my team, you know, is there an inclination towards sport, is there an inclination towards the sneaker ecosystem, and are you excited by that? Is there an inclination towards fashion and how we can kind of build more aspiration into what we do? Is there an inclination towards creativity? Do you find, you know, interesting work that marketers are doing? Do you find it extremely exciting and inspirational, and you constantly research it proactively yourself, right? I think
Mm.
some of these are just you know, indicators. Again, they are inclinations, it doesn't mean you have to do it, but it helps, right? Because I think, at least my experience is, if you really truly like what you're doing, you tend to be better at it,
Yeah.
right? Because the work doesn't seem like a burden, right? Which is super critical with marketing. If you're not enjoying what you're doing, the good ideas just stop flowing, right? So I think uh, you need to be right brained, you need to be left brained, you could be either, you could also be a combination, and that's fine. It's about, I think, fitting you into the ecosystem and what role you would play in that ecosystem. I think that's important. um, but again, like I said, I think for me the rule of thumb is, if you think that uh, rapidly changing priorities and a rapidly changing ecosystem and rapidly changing consumer behaviors exhausting for you to keep up with, you won't enjoy this space, right? That's just a rule of
Right.
thumb.
I love your approach here, where we it could be anything. A good marketer, but you definitely define what a marketer should not be, which is if you can't do change management well. So I think you
Correct.
put that very well. Um, I want to now jump into, asking you a question on behalf of IndieFolio's community. We are essentially a network of graphic designers, animators, photographers, as well as a lot of studios who we represent. And whenever I talk to marketers, there's always this conversation on the golden age of advertising, where
Hmm.
brands and agencies really partner with each other, and all
Hmm.
those things come up.
Hmm. Hmm.
But that's not the case today. And in fact, I feel with a lot of pressure on all parties, right?
Hmm.
I just feel there's a lot of tension and a lot of
Hmm.
stress
Hmm.
between clients or other brands and agencies.
Hmm.
Um, what do you think is at the heart of these increased tensions between both these
Hmm.
stakeholders year
Hmm.
on year?
You know, it's an interesting question, because I've heard so many people say, like, hey, you know, like brands and agencies just don't see eye to eye. And, you know, like if you open LinkedIn, you just see a feed full of like agencies complaining about how brands just don't understand creativity, and brands complaining about how agencies just don't understand ROI. Right. But I think, if you ask me, I think that tension will continue to exist. And I think it's not bad that it does, right? Because I think fundamentally, if you break it down, agencies and brands come from two very different places, right? So, as an agency, at the end of the day, no matter how great the ROI is for a client that you've delivered, either due to confidentiality, the client will not talk about it, or even if the client does talk about it, it's going to be their victory, not yours as an agency, right? So you got to solve for what could be your victory, which is how amazing the idea is, right? And if that's the goal, then the way you approach it will be very different, right? You will think about, is it the most creative piece of work that you've done? Is it interesting to a particular set of people whose opinion you value, which are also creative people, right? And hence the joke where you'll see agencies be like, oh, we came up with this great idea, but then, like the CMO showed it to their like mother-in-law, and the mother-in-law said no, and then they were like, oh, okay, then this idea doesn't work, right? And honestly, I think the reason why brands do that is not because we think the people that we show it to are more creative than the agency. Obviously, we know that's not true. But the reason why we show it to like common people is because at the end of the day, they are probably going to be the audience, right? And I wish a majority of our audience really appreciated creativity and really appreciated great creative work. But the fact is, they don't care, right? The average person doesn't care. They probably miss that interesting pun that you put in there. And so when you're advertising to them, you basically have to be like, okay, what if this person that doesn't have a creative bone in their body actually register, right? So we're clearly solving for two very different sets of people, and we have to, right? Because our objectives are clearly very different. I think second is, again, the way to measure success is very different, right? Because again, a brand will have their own KPIs. They may be hard KPIs or soft KPIs, but they have their own internal metrics to measure this. And for a creative person in an agency, it's probably awards, it's appreciation from the creative community, right? So again, the lens with which we view how to set this campaign up for success is not the same, right? And it cannot be, again, right? Because we are fundamentally treading two different paths. So will this tension exist? Yes, I think so. Though I do believe that a lot of these edge cases that show up on LinkedIn are pretty much that. I think most of the friction lies somewhere in the middle, and it's like a 20% difference of opinion. Like, I'll give you a small example, right? We were doing this campaign beginning of the year, and we had to end the film with a certain copy, right? And the agency and us had a difference of opinion on whether we should use the word "the" in the copy or not, right? That was the degree of disagreement, right? And their point of view is, it's not as nice sounding, it's not as poetic, it's not as creative, which was completely on point, by the way. It wasn't. But my point of view is, if people don't understand at the end of this amazing film what is the product that I'm talking about, then what's the entire point of doing the film at all, right? So um, can I blame them for doing their job? No, they are a creative agency. Their job is to be creative, right? And I am spending hard-earned money that people have made on the shop floor. So my goal is that this delivers value to them, right, and makes their job easier. So we just fundamentally come from two different sides of the table, according to me. And I don't really think you can resolve that tension, but it's okay, frankly, because I think opposing views is kind of what eventually leads to a better outcome. And I really believe the logo bada banao and client doesn't care about anything other than a massive product and our edge cases. I think most of us do see the value in creativity driving outcomes. That's why we do hire creative agencies. So the delta is usually like this, right? They're just like, it's a
Right.
20% difference. And yeah, you eventually get to a point where you agree, or unfortunately for the agency, because the brand is the one putting in the money, the brand has the final call, right? But yeah, I mean, I think this will exist. The tension will exist. That being said, I think, to be very honest, I wish we were still in a world where life was easy and you could only advertise on print and radio and TV and maybe out of home, because that would make our job so much simpler. But the reality is that, like I said, the world is changing really fast, and like literally every touch point is a way to advertise. The napkins that you use in a restaurant are also a way to advertise now. Right. So I think, at least my observation is, of course, there are the purists who believe in the good old days of advertising, where creativity and copy and all of that took center stage, right? And you did one amazing ad of 2 minutes, and you ran that all year on multiple touch points. And because there were mandatorily breaks on TV, or there was only radio and there was no Spotify and no music on demand and no OTT. You had to consume that ad, right? So it made sense, but that doesn't exist anymore. The rules have
Correct.
changed, right? So as much as we would all love to be purists, we also need to deliver results, and clearly we don't have that luxury anymore, right? And hence the shift in terms of how we're doing things. I do think that some large agencies have adapted
Mm.
to that, right? I see a lot of them now have, for example, innovation wings within their ecosystem that understands how to leverage digital platforms, which now seem to be the primary place where most brands continue to invest. Do the best with that. So I do think some agencies are adapting, but I think the fundamental challenge that we sometimes face as a brand is the larger heritage agencies still think very FMCG and very TV first,
Mm.
which is not who we are as a brand. And the smaller agencies don't have the experience to deliver things at scale.
Mm.
Right, so they struggle to think 360. They struggle to think multiple touch points. They struggle to take it beyond the initial idea. Right, so honestly, to find that agency that can do both is sometimes a challenge. And frankly, the way we tackle that is we've built a pretty robust in-house team, right? So
Mm.
even if you as an agency come with a great idea, which is like 50% of the job done, we
Right.
are comfortable to take it in-house and execute it in a way that makes sense, right? So we're happy to take on the reins and do the creative design. We're happy to take on the reins and figure how the shoot should be done, who should feature in it, what are the multiple legs across our channels, owned as well as paid partner channels, what are the alliances that we need to do to bring it to life, right? Frankly, that's the way that we are dealing with it, right? And what I've realized honestly is, I mean, when I took over this team, I think we were 8 or 9 people. We are probably close to 30 now, right? Having enough built enough internal muscle always helps, because one, your turnaround times and your cost efficiencies are always, the most optimized when you have an in-house team. You also have a team that's living and breathing the brand every day, right? So some of those very intuitive things of like, is this on point for us, is this something that we as a brand would say or do or put out, is very difficult to explain to somebody who's working with you for the first time. It's very easy for somebody who does this job every day to, intuitively say, this is not our vibe, right? So frankly, I don't really blame agencies if they're not able to kind of figure this out in the short span of time that they have pitched and worked on a project. My thing is like, come with a great idea and then we can figure out the rest together.
Right. I think you actually made a lot of points. I want to double click on one, two of them.
Hmm.
I think there are two existential threats a lot of
Hmm.
creative agencies feel right now. One
Hmm.
is brands realizing that in housing
Hmm.
makes a ton of sense,
Hmm.
and it's just going to get easier with
Hmm.
AI, right? It's
Hmm.
like your technical knowledge is the requirement has become zero,
Hmm.
or it will become zero maybe in a year or two, as
Hmm.
per my prediction.
Hmm.
So because of AI and brands going in house more and more,
Hmm.
agencies, especially the smaller ones, are
Hmm.
really thinking, oh my god, is work going to go
Hmm. Hmm.
completely?
Hmm.
So what advice would you have for these, boutique creative agencies, studios, or
Hmm.
maybe independent freelancers
Hmm.
on how do I still be
Hmm.
relevant for
Hmm.
marketers like you?
Look, I think while you are right that I think a lot of teams are either building in-house muscle, or they are working with like independent freelancers now, or internet personalities that are venturing into the creative space, even though it's not their forte. I do think there is still a fundamental dearth of great creative ideas, right? So I mean, interestingly, I was just talking to somebody from the agency side a couple of days ago, and they said, like, what do you really want from agencies? And I said, you know what? What we really want is your best creative people who churn out great ideas. The rest of like strategy and insights and account management is what we put up with, right? So we can get to the eventual meat, which is like amazing ideas. So I still fundamentally think that there is a dearth of creative ideas. And of course, while an in-house team brings in a lot of efficiency, as does AI, I do believe that it's unfair to expect that same set of people to churn out a brilliant idea every time, right? We're all only human. um, right? And the reason why we still do tend to outsource work is because you do want other creative brains thinking about the same problem statement and seeing if they can crack a better angle. Right, so there is a certain saturation point that does come when you work with the same set of people again and again and again, because they also tend to think the same way. Right, and frankly, that is my logic for not having an agency on retainer as well, because it's just unreasonable to expect the same set of four people working on your account to crack an insanely brilliant idea with a different lens every time, right? It's just unreasonable. So I do think there is still a need for agencies that just come up with insanely cracker creative insights and ideas, that we can then collectively work with them to bring to life. That is still a bit of a dearth, right? I mean, people are spending a lot of money on marketing, and more brands are spending on marketing, as opposed to back in the heyday when there were a few who would spend and the rest wouldn't. But not most ideas are not good. Right, I mean, some are great, but on average they are not. Right, so
Yeah.
there is still a very very large dearth of great creative ideas, and I do think creative agencies can still very much plug the gap there if you just kind of cut the fuss, hire the best
Hmm.
creative people, and just don't worry about anything else, honestly, if you ask me.
Superb. I think idea is the moat, is the biggest takeaway, and I think it's
Correct.
been that, and it'll remain that for the foreseeable future. Just one thing I wanted to just get your perspective on. While you say ideas, right? I've worked with a lot of clients, especially in performance campaigns. Where they're like, I don't care about the idea. Give me 50 ideas. I will see what data tells me. That is the best idea.
Hmm.
And when I go back to the network and my creative team and say this, they're like, this is so frustrating. Like, is it the end of creativity? Because
Hmm.
all decisions, even creative, are driven by data.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, what's your take there? In this A/B testing world,
Hmm. Hmm.
variety world, experimentation work,
Hmm.
does the idea really matter?
Hmm. See, good question. I think the way we also bifurcate this is what is our primary objective, right? And for a brand like ours, it's very important to ask that question, because you're not selling a shoe, like you're selling aspiration, right? Otherwise, why is somebody spending 12K on your shoe when they could be spending 2K on, like a local brand's shoe? Right, so for us, the way we look at this is my primary objective long term brand building and aspiration building, or is my primary objective short term impact, right? And sometimes it is short term impact, it has to be. And even in long term brand building, while it may not be the primary objective you solve for, you still do track short term outcomes, right, as you should. Because at the end of the day, let's not pretend that marketing does not eventually lead to sales and profitability, right? That is the end goal, that's why you pump money here. So let's not pretend we do it for art's sake. Right, it does serve a purpose. However, that purpose does not necessarily have to be immediate. Right, it can, I mean, like the classic example is the Nike Just Do It campaigns as well, right? It took them years and years and years to get to the point now where when they say they are releasing a new campaign, people actually look forward to it, right? If the goal was just short term uplift, that would have never taken off, probably, right? So I think it's important to separate. Both are needed. It's important to classify what's your primary objective. And for a lot of people, if performance is the primary objective, right, in the short term, then the reality is that that has to be optimized, right? When I put out a Black Friday sale creative, the most important thing is Black Friday and whatever 20%, 25% written clearly enough for people to register, right? And there we do A/B testing, right? Because there you need a short term conversion. And what's the point of saying the idea is great if your sale didn't do well, right? The primary objective is to drive sale in that period. But when I'm doing a really gutsy campaign, right, which is about long term perception building and brand affinity within a cohort, then frankly, um, if you know how it's going to turn out, then you're not doing something creative and innovative enough, right? Because the idea of being a first mover and a disruptor is that you have no effing clue how that campaign is going to land, right? Like I tell my team, if you're not sweating bricks the night before, that this will either be amazing, or like I say, I'll probably lose my job. You're probably not being bold and unconventional enough, right? So will I take that approach with the Black Friday campaign? No. But will I take it with a long term brand building campaign? Yes. Right. So I think I think even for agencies and teams that get briefed by clients, it's important to understand which of the buckets it falls in first, right? And if it falls in the second bucket, unfortunately, yes, creativity is priority two, right? And efficiency and outcomes are priority one, and that too in the short term. So yeah, that's just a reality that we have to live with.
So I think brilliantly put. Thank you so much for such an honest and such a truthful answer. I think it really comes down to the objective, and a lot of creative agencies forget that in the whole creative process. They get too attached to the idea, and then they're like, "Oh, this is me," and you're saying I am bad. So that I think is important for them
Creative
to know.
people are emotional. I think that's their best and worst trait. You have to, yeah, you have to live with it.
Absolutely. So, talking about being creative and ideas, I think I want to talk to you about innovation fatigue. You know,
Hmm.
every day somebody comes into the room and says, "Aaj kuch naya karte hai."
Hmm.
Let's do something different. Let's do
Hmm.
something cool.
Hmm.
Look at that brand; they're doing something so awesome.
Hmm.
Like, so many people are like, "Oh God, like how do I keep on being creative every single day? Like, when will this ever end? Or is this the right benchmark to
Hmm.
look at a marketing team of a brand or even an advertising agency?"
Hmm.
So how do you deal with this
Hmm.
innovation fatigue with your team and
Hmm.
with your agencies?
See, to be very honest, it exists and it's real. Right? I was speaking to somebody in my team a couple of months back, and she's like, I'm like 5, 6 years into my journey, and I'm already wondering how long can I sustain this, right? Because we also do the same, where every month we're like, अच्छा अब 2 महीने में ये वाला campaign आ रहा है, and now we need to think of another idea. Right. So first of all, creative fatigue is real. Right? It's never ending. Um, I think the way to look at this is a couple of things. I think one is to, at least what I do as a very solid practice, is every time I see an agency that's doing decent work, I immediately go and meet them, right? And I think the more creative people that you meet, and you kind of do at least those initial conversations to understand, are we on the same wavelength, are these people that we could potentially work with in the future, and hence expand your network, the less pressure there is on the same set of people to crack new ideas again and again, right? The second thing, honestly, which um, I think we have been working very hard as a team to do year on year, is, I mean, the measure of a successful team is not the number of campaigns you do. You can do lesser campaigns, do them really well. At the end of the day, the consumer remembers just 2 or 3 things about you, right? There is an information overload, there is a content overload. Everything that you do in the year is not what people are going to remember. There are maybe 1 or 2 or 3 things max, and if you've done your job well, that is, right? So to very proactively as a team cut down the number of things that we're doing, figure our topmost priorities, and it can be either, hey, these are massive business priorities for the organization, or these are platforms or narratives that we want to sustain continuously, or this is a great idea and it will really make a mark, right? And take your pick. But put these together and pick the topmost priorities and all, and just focus all of your energies on them, right? So then it's not about thinking of a great creative idea every week, but you have 3 months to crack one insane idea, and you can work with a larger network of people to figure out how to make it work, right? So like I said, again, that's why we don't do the AOR model at all, because I would like to pick the brain of a larger set of creative people every time we decide to do something that is critical for us as a brand. And then you get to pick the best of what's out there, not the best of what a selected group of people could come up with, right? So creative fatigue will continue, right? And I think there are ways to optimize for it, but there are a lot of days, and like as a team, for example, we have days where we basically just do an entire day of brainstorming, right? And typically, I don't let the team touch their laptop that day or do any other very practical work. 100% focus. Come in the morning. We do a lot of like fun, energizers where we're screaming and shouting, and the entire office is like peering in, like, what's wrong with these people? Because you have to be in the right kind of mind frame to actually think of good ideas, give people enough notice to actually rework and study what's out there. And okay, fine, even if you can't think of ideas and come, at least come with a file of inspiration, like, hey, I saw these five things and I thought they were great, and start as a touch point, feed off each other's energy, build off each other's ideas, right? So there are ways that you can optimize for creative fatigue, but yeah, there are days where we crack an idea in one sitting, and there are days when you need like 2 months, right? And maybe three agency pitches for something to stick, right? And yeah, such is life. It's not a science. That's the best part about it. But yeah,
Right. I saw this reel by Jack Dorsey of Twitter, and I think he said something which I really resonated with what you said, which is, if you really want to kind of crack things, it's very broad advice he was giving. Like, you have to limit the number of details and perfect every detail. Like, it's
correct,
simple rule. He says he's
correct,
followed to do well in life, and I really resonate with that. Where a lot of times people think if you want to be like damn good, you should do a lot of things and
correct.
to be very good at all of it, and they end up just burning themselves to the ground.
Yeah,
But I think the real winners are the ones who know what exactly to do, what not to do, and how to do those things extremely well. So I really
correct,
kind of
correct.
resonate with what you just said. um, I'll just now move on to, I think, controversies, and
Hmm.
what do you feel about that?
Hmm.
You've had a fair share of them. your
Hmm.
your You Need Balls campaign
Hmm.
had, I think, some two sides of two sides of the
Hmm.
opinions coming up, and
Hmm.
I believe even the whole nepotism bit caught you with
Hmm.
hiring I think Shania Kapoor and Ibrahim Ali Khan.
Yeah.
I wanted you to kind of break, or rather give your perspective on this statement everybody throws around, right? Any
Hmm.
publicity is good publicity,
Hmm.
or any
Hmm.
PR is good PR.
Hmm. Hmm.
Is that true? And
Hmm.
how do you balance yourself in these? How do you rather, as a brand, communicate with people when you are
Hmm.
in such a situation?
Okay, so couple of things that I'm going to say, right? I think the first is that if you ask any marketer, their biggest fear is actually indifference, right? Because all of us put our heart and soul into everything we do. So our the thing that depresses and scares us the most is actually when nobody cares at all. A certain amount of polarizing views is something that you expect when you do anything unconventional or bold, right? It's a given, because yeah, we are fundamentally diverse as individuals, and there will be a lot of people that will not like what you do. I think it's very, very important to keep your ears on the ground and keep listening to what the responses are, and very dispassionately evaluate whether they make sense or not. Right? I think equally more important is the realization that not every opinion is worth acting on. Right? There are some opinions where if they are criticizing you and you read them and you feel there is merit in what they are saying, it makes sense as a brand to solve for that. But there are a lot of opinions also where uh, you look at it and you're like, yeah, that's fine, like, it's okay, I can live with that negativity, right? So the You Need Balls campaign, again, we knew that it was very unconventional, and um, we broadly anticipated discomfort from two sets of people, right? So we anticipated discomfort from, of course, conventional people who say, "Oh, balls, that's obscene," and all of that.
Mm.
And then we actually expected a discomfort from the feminist argument point of view, right? Which is essentially you're using language to reinforce a stereotype, which is that balls equals men equals strength, right? Which I get. I also have studied enough on the impact of language to know that there is merit in that argument. But the way I looked at it was, as a feminist, yes, at some level, am I reinforcing a certain like mindset by using certain language? Yes. But as a marketer, saying you don't need balls, does it have the same impact as saying you need balls and putting a woman on the cover with a cricket ball? it doesn't, right? So as a marketer, you do have to take those tough calls on, like, if your goal is to actually get people to engage in a meaningful way with you rather than just skip it past because you've done something very generic and expected. You have to take those tough calls, right? And to the first set of people, that's fine, you're not my audience anyway,
Hmm.
right? So I think you have to balance it enough and have the maturity if someone's actually pointing out something that holds merit, to step back and say, how do I pivot,
Yeah.
right? But to also have enough of a thick skin to say, yeah, this negativity I can live with,
Hmm.
right? And I think the more experience you get, the better you get at kind of navigating these. Does it still sting when there are negative comments? Of course, it always does, right? But you get better and better dealing with it. And I think the important part is, yeah, like I said, it's important to listen to every opinion. It's even more important to not act on every opinion, right? So I think, yeah, I think a lot of what we do is designed to be bold and hence fundamentally polarizing in nature. That's okay. We live on the edge. That's fine.
Again, I think very well put. I think people always struggle between, I think, like you said, being indifferent or rather being bold and
Hmm.
and and not facing back and facing backlash.
Yeah.
Like we have examples of two brands who, let's say, used Poonam Pandey very recently, and one in a very bad way and one in a pretty interesting way
Yeah.
by borrowing that. So I think
Yeah.
it's sometimes very subjective,
It
these
is, and
calls
I
you
think
take.
it's important for brand managers to figure what are the guardrails of their brand, right? Um, Puma is not a Durex, right? So the guardrails for me are very different than the guardrails for them. They can get away with stuff that I cannot get away with. It's important to understand what is the playing field for your brand, and hence logically, existing in this playing field will push your brand forward or pull it back, is what you really need to identify, right? As long as you are true to that and what your brand stands for. Some brands are inherently meant to be provocative and live on the edge, right? And if that's their brand personality and that's what they're consistently building, then frankly, that's fine. Right. But if that's not your brand personality and you're doing it because it seems like a trend, or you're desperate for, I don't know, eyeballs, then you will see it in the numbers also, right? So I think, I mean, again, like, I think it kind of like boils down to you guys setting the guardrails for your own brand and then figuring what is the right communication approach, basis that. And of course, track your campaigns well, both qualitatively as well as quantitatively, and figure, are there few voices of dissonance, or is there large scale discomfort? And if there's large scale discomfort, is it because your brand is designed to elicit that kind of a response, right? So I think that's really how maybe to navigate the space.
Got it. Got it. I'll move to the next question. I think I forget exactly who this was. If I'm not wrong, it was either Steve Jobs or Bill Gates or somebody like that, where they said that, I'm not afraid of my $1 billion public competition. I'm afraid of these, two young kids probably in their garage doing something which can disrupt me. And you hear these statements a lot in technology, tech-led companies, right? But maybe the last decade's been a great example where, conventionally, whenever you used to buy a toothpaste or a shoe or something like maybe not apparel, but some very fast moving consumer goods, right? You always used to think of these big brands, and very few entrepreneurs even thought of starting something in those areas. But now, you Shark Tank's a great example where there's so many brands, in fact, doing really well as well. And as somebody at your position, right, you're, I think, one of the most recognizable brands in your industry, in your category. Um, do you feel that? What do you feel is that particular thing which scares you, right? Is from the young brands? Is it that young brands will be great at creating better products, or is it that they will be better at marketing those products well? Like, what do you think um, stresses you probably, and that could be a great lesson for any young builder today to know what to kind of focus on.
See, I think first of all, our industry is very much marked by small challenger brands, not just in India but globally as well, right? So, um, I mean, yeah, Nike, Adi, Puma exists, but then there are new brands like Hoka. There are also brands like Lululemon. I think New Balance is doing a great job at growing fast. There's On. There are so many brands, right? And in India as well, there's a Gully Labs. There are so many small brands, right? And I think they're all doing a good job. So I think the first thing is, as an existing, brand, as an incumbent, it's important to not be complacent, right? I think the mistake sometimes that large brands do is they are so comfortable in their number one position that they get complacent, right? But my former manager used to say this. He used to say, "What got us here will not keep us here." Right. So I think you get to a certain position because you innovate, you're agile, you're thinking ahead of others, and if you don't retain that, it's very easy for a challenger brand to come in and overtake you. So I think if you have a certain advantage, don't be complacent. Right. I think there's also a certain tendency towards newness, right, within consumers. So all the data tells us that loyalty is kind of a thing of a past, right? Everybody is seeking newness. Everybody wants to come across as distinctive, and that often means going to a smaller unknown brand so as to not look like everybody else, right? So there is definitely a tendency towards trying the new. Every time a new global brand opens its doors in India, there is a large flock of traffic because there is that tendency to want something new and something different, right? So that is very much, I think, something that as brands we should be aware of, and figure what are we doing to ensure that that newness that a consumer seeks, can we solve for it within our portfolio, right? There will be some amount of market share fragmentation whenever a challenger comes in, and that's to be understood, right? And I think everyone who stays in the longer run is, like some of these smaller incumbents are very focused. They found their niche. They are digging their heels down and doing a good job in establishing their capability in that niche, right? So as a larger brand that is probably not a niche brand but a brand at scale, what are you doing to ensure that that market share that is being gained, you are at least doing your best to gain that back, right? So whether it's through innovation, whether it's through creativity, whether it's different products, whether it's staying up to date with what the consumer is looking for and responding with agility. It's always easier for a smaller brand to be agile than sometimes larger brands. So it's important that larger brands make a more proactive effort to be agile, especially when it comes to reacting to consumer behaviors and trends. Right. I think if you solve for all of these, it's you can still at least retain most of your share. Right. But if you get complacent and you're like, like, oh, this is a local brand or a global brand, consumer doesn't care, right? If it's great product, and there is a certain newness appeal to it, they'd rather spend their money there, right? So what are you as a brand kind of doing to solve for those need gaps is what I would say helps.
Fantastic. I think I truly resonate with that. Where I feel today, if you want to be signaling yourself as cool, you'd be wanting to have these new unheard things, in your on you or on your in your
The
bag.
conversation starters.
Conversation starters, yes. And I think it's really been great for young companies where it's really made the whole it's made the whole feel very like level playing, right? Where you're like, okay, I think I can still beat maybe this brand in this category in this region,
Yeah,
at least for the
yeah.
first year.
The interesting thing is the goals for some of these newer age brands are very different, right? They don't want to be as big as a Nike or an Adi or a Puma. They don't care. They want dominance in their segment, and it's not defined by revenue. It's defined by top of mind recall in that segment, right? And it's a very interesting approach because I think scaling is not as important as depth in a particular category, and that's a very interesting approach to see.
Absolutely, absolutely. We're almost at time, so I'm gonna jump to the last two questions I have for you. So I think there's a lot of there was a lot of chatter about, digital ads being, there's a lot of fatigue looking at ads everywhere. And then people were like, influencer marketing works brilliantly well. And I know you employ that pretty well, and a lot of other brands do. My wife actually is also a content creator, so from
Okay.
their side also I understand what's happening. But now I'm also hearing a lot of people say, I'm tired of this influencer bullshit, right? Like every influencer is promoting a brand. Now they have their own brands, and they're losing faith in that also. And
Mm-hmm.
there is the conversation of UGC, where
Mm-hmm.
maybe that seems like the near future as to what will happen there.
Mm-hmm.
What's your perspective in terms of, where attention is going, what's seeming more authentic to consumers, and what mediums generally working well in digital?
See, I think it's a combination of everything, honestly. The one thing that we as a brand have realized is it's not one versus the other, it's everything together. Right? So you have to create your own content as well, because you as a brand must signal and put out there what you stand for. You must work with content creators because you have to reach out to their audiences who are watching them for a particular reason. And if you've done a good job at integrating your objectives with the way they communicate to your audience, and you are able to do it at scale, this is what I tell people. The challenge sometimes with all of this is that a lot of it is not measurable and a lot of it is not short term, right? So people keep asking me, hey, like if you had to spend on 50 micro influencers instead of like one cat Bollywood celebrity, what would you do? But my point is like it's not either or. Right? It's a lot easier to say, hey, cat celebrity, because when I look at bottom of the funnel, they drive bottom of the funnel better for me. But all studies tell you that people prefer advocates, not ambassadors, with brands, because they feel advocates genuinely love the product and the ambassador is paid, right? So you get visibility with the ambassador, but you don't necessarily get a long time consumer. Right? So personally, I think it's how you manage your funnel and how you deploy different touch points for different parts of the funnel. Yes, UGC is great if you can get it. That's like the best form of consumer validation, but it's very difficult. It's tough to scale. It's tough to control the quality of content. So can that be the only strategy? No. But is it great in terms of having brand advocates who are genuinely posting content? It's an amazing validation of what the brand stands for, right? So I think the right way to do this is actually to look at what is the best medium for what part of the funnel that you're trying to activate. What is the most optimized way to solve for that medium? What is the best platform for that? Right? And then deploy multiple things across the funnel, to put it together, right? What we have historically seen is that for campaigns and for product franchisees where we have done the full stack, right? We have done everything from our content to huge amounts of digital spends to some amount of traditional media spends to influencer activation to consistent social content to UGC to on ground events to everything put together. Not only is there an uptick during the period of activation, but that uptick sustains as a new baseline once you stop activating, right? Because you've done thing in a holistic way. But for campaigns where they are much smaller budgets, you do see that you will see a little bit of an uptick during the activation period and it will immediately drop afterwards, right? So um, I think the right approach is not either or, the right approach is and if you do that well is where you see a holistic lift across the funnel.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think it's not an or, it's an and. I think that's very important. And people generally take these trends and advice and just say, like, okay, this is all I'll do. And then they kind of fail. So I think that's a very rookie mistake a lot of brands, or at least a lot of young people make. Awesome. I think, Shreya, we're at our last question now. You've been giving a lot of advice, but I think even as a parting thought, I'd love for you to maybe just give your top advice for any young marketer who,
Hmm.
let's say, wants to be in your shoe one day, right?
Hmm.
What should I do to make sure that I have a successful career and I can one day become
Hmm.
a marketing leader?
See, I think which is very basic advice, and frankly, I think it applies to not just marketing but any role you do, right? I think one is keep educating yourself, because the world around you is changing, and the more skills you have, the more formidable you are, to any organization, and hence the dependency of the organization on you increases, right? Which is an employee's dream, right? That you're so critical to an organization, that you're indispensable almost, right? And large chunk of that is to constantly keep educating yourself with new things that emerge, new skills that you need to build. I think a lot of it also has to do with mindset, right? So, like I tell my teams as well, right? In my experience, the highest performers and the people with the disproportionate growth trajectory have, in general, displayed similar kinds of mindsets. At least the people that I've seen, right? One is a very very high problem solving approach, right? So they are not problem identifiers. They are people who actually solve the problem, right? And are constantly thinking how to fix this. So, like I tell my team as well, like, when you come to me, don't say, hey, this can't be done. Say, here's what I need to make this happen. Right? So problem solvers approach is very important, especially in something like marketing, because you're dependent on so many external factors that are beyond your control. That shit is always going down, right? And if that bogs you down, rather than being like, okay, problem one, let's solve it, problem two, let's solve it, problem three, let's solve it, you will kind of struggle to grow, and your growth will plateau. I think third is also, it's a very tactical advice, but I tell people this, like, as managers, if you've hired right, everybody will do their job well, right? But there are few people that you as a manager will depend on when it's really critical, right? When shit goes down, right? And the goal should always be to be that person, right? Um, that I can reach out to this person and say, hey, shit is going down and we need to solve this. And they're like immediately on board, they're agile, they know how to switch their priorities, they know how to get with the program quick. They can focus on the new task at hand. There is high ownership in delivering the outcome. They are pushy to optimize for the outcome even during the process, right? So I think some of these things are very, again, first principle, and they are more mindset than skill set. But in my experience across the board, I think this is what differentiates high performers, right? So if I have somebody in my team, when shit goes down and I really have to coax them to get with the program, like, okay, I know there's a lot on your plate, but why don't you deprioritize that? Can you figure a way to make this happen? Versus somebody who's like, don't worry, I'm working on these three things, but I'm going to put them aside, like, I'm going to get with the program. Here's the problem, but here are my three ways that I think we can solve for it, right? And I think the tendency as a manager to rely on these people becomes higher, and hence they are top of mind for you, right? If you are top of mind in the organization, is frankly where you grow, right? And that doesn't mean like working insane hours or always being at someone's beck and call. It's less to do with the hours or the effort. It's more to do with the approach to work, right? And I think that really, at least in my experience, I've seen unanimously across the board high performers display. So I really think a lot of it is, and again, like, what we do is not rocket science. So that's what I tell people, right? When I'm moving someone also internally, right? My hypothesis is that if you've been a high performer in your previous role, you will probably be a high performer here as well. Versus, I'm always iffy to move someone from another department where I'm told, hey, they're really not performing well here, but that's because their passion lies in marketing. 9 out of 10 times they do a shitty job here as well, right? And it's got nothing to do with passion, it's got to do with your approach to the job, right? So yeah, I think it's not rocket science what we do. So as long as, yeah, the fundamentals are in place, and they are basic and simple, but they are not like very common to come by, right? And that in itself makes a huge difference to how you identify the people that grow fast.
Right. I think that's some golden advice and very, very practical. So thank you so much for that, Shreya. I think that ends the podcast for us. It's taken a while to get you here, but I'm so glad you came, and I think
No,
it was a
likewise.
phenomenal podcast. I think I learned a lot myself, and I'm sure everybody else is also. I hope you had fun.
I did. I'm glad we could finally do this.
Superb, superb. And for everybody who's tuned along, thank you so much for joining. If you want to hear another marketing leader like Shreya very soon, please like, share, and subscribe. A new episode will come out very, very soon. Bye bye.